Good morning. We're here to open up our meeting for the Health and Safety Advisory Committee. And we'll start with Marcine with a roll call. I'm going to move on over to the Executive Officer opening remarks to Christy Underwood.
All right, so I don't have very many opening remarks. We are continuing where we left off. Last time you did get a new packet, which is, we have the whole packet, right? So we will be starting on page 26 with violation number 981A. Right. We'll just trade them. We'll share with Personal. And, sorry. So I wanted to just mention that we will be looking at the actual fines for the fine schedule. We had mentioned at the last meeting looking at potentially making those into a range of fines as opposed to our first, second, and third. So we will be looking at that. So what we are hoping that the committee will focus on today is really looking at these violations to determine are they related to consumer harm? That is, the legislature in SB 803, our sunset bill, wanted us to really look at our fine schedule and the violations and what actually impacts consumer harm. So keeping that in your mind as we go forward and hopefully get this wrapped up today, and then we'll move forward with putting together at the staff level a new fine schedule. Okay? So that is the opening marks, but before we get started, we do have one other agenda item, which is a review and possible approval of our March 14th committee meeting minutes. So we would need a motion to approve those minutes.
I put forward a motion.
I second. I had one edit to it, if I could. This is not on. There was right at the very beginning, it said something about my wanting the laundry thing, but it was a misquote. Let me find it here.
Is it page 3 in the third paragraph?
Yes. I just look. I did a quick search on my name. Page 3. Let's see. Oh, it's showing up on page 7 for me.
Page 7 of the PDF is page 3 of the minutes.
Yeah, so it says which schools should teach, and it's more of what schools should teach, just some guidelines. The only reason I mention that is there have been some schools are a little bit wary right now of doing anything around laundry and certain like disinfection procedures that are seen as cleaning, because there had been some schools that were having students clean bathrooms and do other things that they shouldn't be doing. But in general, laundry kept coming up. So it is important for them to understand how to clean laundry and the linen aspect of it. And the states that have not had, the states where it's listed, this is what students need to learn, then it's obviously we can include that in the curriculum. Without it being in the curriculum, it's going to be hard for us to teach it. So it says which schools, but I think it should be what schools should teach.
Okay. Perfect.
So I would like to make a motion with this as amended.
Second.
Public comment on the motion?
Right.
As I Seeing none, can we move to make a vote on this?
Marcine will call the roll.
Okay. Jackie Crabtree,
Yes.
Callie Pham,
Yes.
Reese Isbell,
Yes.
Paul Bryson,
Yes.
Lori Ann Burke, Dee Dee Crossett,
Yes.
Brandon Hart,
Yes.
and Leslie Rossi.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, now we can move on to the floor to discussion and possible action regarding the staff analysis of the board laws and regs.
Okay. We are starting on page 26.
All right.
We are starting with violation number 981A, no disposal of non-disinfectable items. The example for when this is cited is when we find disposable items that have not been thrown away immediately after use. Most common is nail buffers, emery boards, and wax sticks. We ranked this as a high risk to consumers. I believe that that's correct, but would open any comments to any of the committee members. 981A.
If it's a high risk, how come it just starts at 100?
How come? I couldn't tell you. That's definitely what the fee is set at. So that's something we could consider.
Well, I think in the past, this isn't just, yeah, I don't know why some of ours start at like 1 or 50 and then the other one's 250.
And we may not really know what we're looking at. Should it be adjusted, right? And if it was established in the past and it was deemed to be proper at the time, but
Right.
we're just looking at it with new eyes.
The fine schedule was established by a fine task force. Initially, and then I know in my time being with the board, we had a fine task force that I think in my time of being with the board, which has been a long time, we've changed the fines twice. So each time we've held task force meetings to review those fines. Never kind of in this way, where we actually are looking at the actual relation to consumer harm. Even though that was probably part of the discussion, but the fines were set in the past by a task force.
We have the liner fine starting at $250 right above it, and not replacing the disposable liner. And maybe we should fall a little bit more in line with that, since it's really the same sort of an offense.
Agreed. I agree. I would like to move it up to 250.
I've got a question. It seems like there's a significant number of violations identified relatively compared to other sections. Would that be because there could be multiple instances of a violation in one setting? So for example, they could find a dozen during one inspection, which would result in $1,200 of fines for this?
No. Well, yes and no. It could be multiple. Well, Carrie, actually, can I ask, do you know if when we tabulated these violations, were we only looking at establishments or?
No, I believe it was everything.
Okay, everything, which makes sense. So we could walk into an establishment and see 5 workers who all have this violation. And so they're gonna all get that fine and the establishment owner. So that could be 6 for one. Or we could walk into an establishment and see 5 of these violations, but not at any one station. So we can't tie it to a particular person. So that means the owner's only getting 1. So there's a chance we could go into an establishment and find this excessively, and often does happen, but it's only 1 fine. So it's really kind of both in a sense.
So if one person had a dozen nail files, they're
They
still getting 1 violation?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Then I definitely think we need to move the price up.
It's one of our top violations that we find, and I personally think it's a significant cause for consumer harm.
I agree, I think
Gross.
we should raise the price on it for sure.
Do we need a motion for that?
I think we'll take the motion at the end. So I think, yes.
I agree that it's a risk for harm, but our case would be stronger if there are any statistics. Do we have any statistics on infections transmitted by people being careless, reusing files and things like that?
I don't, do you?
No.
Because, I mean, and I don't, I'm honestly, and the reason I think is because when somebody goes into a nail salon and they happen to get an infection, we can't go back and specifically tie that to exactly what happened on that day. We can go in and find that they had used buffers, and that could be attributed to that. But really, we can't ever recreate that person's experience if they used a dirty buffer or not, unless the consumer, we've never had that, right?
No, never we've been able to tie it to it. The consumer's word and
Right.
the basis of our inspection.
To where we could get actual data, which is kind of one of our biggest issues, is when there's a consumer harm, there's a lot of stuff that factors into that. If you have a consumer harmed from a pedicure, did they have a cut on their foot before they went in? There's, or a compromised immune system. So it's hard to actually tie that buffer to an actual consumer harm.
Well, what I'm thinking is more broadly, it'd be tough to tie this particular file on this particular day to this particular finger infection, but is there any kind of a medical statistic that umpteen or this many hundred people per year say, I was at a salon and they got this, or I think I got this at the salon? Broad aggregate data, which we couldn't use to find specific individuals, but which would make a case regulatorily or even legislatively, if need be, for strengthening certain penalties or perhaps backing off on others.
I think that would come from the medical side. One of the things that is also something that we struggle with is when we do receive medical documents from our consumers that are harmed, they rarely will say it came from a nail salon. They will often be, this is what I believe you have, here's how to treat it. So I think that's one of the biggest issues in the industry, is that we don't have that hard data from the medical profession.
But isn't it, Leslie, wouldn't it be more likely that you're going to get, you would know this on the disinfectant side, what I'm going to get from reusing a nail file is a lower risk than what I could potentially get from that plastic liner, right? Like the nail file is sitting out, the feet tend to have more going on than the hands. Like, is that potentially why it would have been rated lower or higher?
I would say that the risk is actually about the same.
Okay.
Because the purpose of a nail file or a pumice stone or any of those things is to trap that tissue. Like, that's why they're made the way they are, with all those little, caveats to it. And so the intention of that is to hold tissue from, so if I do a nail file on you and then I go to her to do a nail file, I'm dragging, by virtue of that,
Right.
everything on you to her, where at least with the liner, there's some, there's water involved, and, they put in the little, the stuff that's supposed to look blue and make your feet feel all fabulous and that kind of thing. I think they're both a high risk. I think to what Paul's talking about, it is an issue across the country, talking about how do we tie things together. Most attorneys would tell you it's very similar to proving food poisoning. How do I prove that I got it from this one restaurant when I ate 3 other meals that day, or 2 other meals that day? How do I prove that that's where I got it? So I think we have to go on what we know could be transmitted. Some of these, arguably, in my opinion, are worse than others. I'm not as offended by a nail buffer, for example, as I am by a reused or dirty wax stick. And that's where, maybe it's a little bit, but I think you kind of have to be all or none here. Like, single-use items are single-use items, because even though I may not be able to prove every single case came from that, if everybody used a single-use item one single time, we would, by virtue of that, have far fewer cases of infection. I think we just have to, we have to draw a line in the sand on single-use items.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I really think that the issue here is not how many cases have been developed. The issue is whether or not the consumer feels safe coming into the establishment. And if this is not held to a good standard, then our standards are lowered as a state. So I really do think that regardless of how many medical cases we might be able to pull forward, the issue is, does the consumer come in and feel safe?
And I think, I could be wrong, but I believe this fine used to be around $50 for a first offense, and the last time we raised them to $100. And we still see it a lot. I think it's gotten a lot better than it used to be. Now that they come with the little tiny buffers, the kind that you can break apart, I see a lot more people are using the small buffers and the small little emery boards, but yeah, not so much for the wax sticks.
You're still saying no.
Yeah.
I also think the other thing is, if you moved it up to the 200, let's say, somebody who's really trying to do the right thing, but maybe made a small error, right? Like somebody left it sitting out, they weren't going to reuse it, they're going to feel that sting and they're never going to do it again. If you keep it so low, businesses may just incorporate those offenses, since they end at 200, as sort of the cost of doing business, because it costs them less to pay $200 a month, or however frequently you guys come out, than it does to replace those things for every client. See what I'm saying? I mean, if the fine is too low, they may just be willing to keep paying it so they don't have to replace all of those disposable items. Which I think is unfortunate, but that could be the case.
And I'd like to piggyback on that. I mean, just being in the industry for 35 years and as many establishments that I've been to over the years, for sure. I think that, and then we see so much at DRC of this as a repeat offense that, we should increase it because the nail salons are notorious, unfortunately, for not throwing those away that we see often.
All right, any other comments on that one? We will move on. Our next violation is 981B, improper storage of new supplies and disposable tools. It's a $50 first offense fine. You can see how often we started to find that in 2016. I can tell you the low amount of this going is likely because we have advised inspectors that this is not a priority. I personally think this is an irrelevant violation. We're asking people to just print a label and put it on their manufacturer box of cotton that's brand new and clean.
It's all over my slot.
So labeling a item in its manufactured container shows no.
But isn't this more for when you take something out, you take the wax sticks out, you put them into a drawer or something, then you label it new or clean or something?
Well, your drawer,
Because we would label that. If it's not, I mean, obviously if something's in a manufactured box, there's this assumption that you're not going to take the used wax stick and put it in a box and try to sell it as clean, right? But to me, it's more of like, at least what we train the students on is what's in that drawer or in that wax caddy kit needs to be labeled new, clean, so that the consumer and the student knows, all right, this is a spoolie that hasn't been used before, this is a nail file, all of these items in here is expected to be clean. So if you've got a gratuity from a guest or a pen or something else, now that's no longer a clean container or new or clean. But I think it's silly to.
I want to tag on to what Dee Dee's saying. I don't think the infraction is something we should just say is no big deal, improper storage of new supplies. I think it's how we're defining it as that single label. I honestly, yeah, I mean, like, why the requirement that they're getting fined for not having a label, what they should be getting fined for is not storing things properly. So taking, for example, new things out and sticking them in a dirty place, or, mixing new things with, things that are waiting to be disinfected, or whatever that is. It shouldn't be about this label, I think, is what we're getting hung up on, and maybe that's not really the intent of the rule. The intent of the rule is that new supplies and disposable things stay together until they're used and then they go in the trash. That should be what we're focusing on.
Focus on not cross-contamination.
Right, focus on keeping fresh things new and fresh until they're used and then they go in the trash, not the label. Maybe the label's where we're getting hung up on this.
So, let's look at the actual verbiage of the violation, which says, new supplies and single-use disposable tools shall be stored in a clean covered place labeled new. Should we clarify that it should be in a clean covered, that means if you are placing them in a container, it needs to be, but we can really, is that a matter
Is
of
it
interpretation?
manufactured? It's the same with disinfectant, right? If you move the disinfectant into another container, you have to label what it is, so people
Yeah.
know. Otherwise, the disinfectant typically comes with the so if it's not in the manufactured label, then, oh, by the way, if you move it, or if you move the lotion, or if you move anything else from what it originally came in, then we are responsible for labeling it. It seems like that would be consistent here. You take it out of the you take the cotton and the 4x4s out of the manufactured containers and put them in your own, then you want to label
So that rule in most states is a secondary labeling, secondary container labeling, that says exactly that. Anytime you move it from a manufacturer's container with those manufacturer's instructions or, you know.
Right, I mean, I like that. when
Yeah,
we
making
move
it
out of the manufacturer's container.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have to handle them in a
Right.
certain way where they're labeled. But I think making everybody label, I mean, what's already labeled by the manufacturer as new,
Right.
it is, that would be frustrating.
So is everybody in agreement that it's when you remove the items from a manufactured labeled container? Okay. All right.
Can I go back for a moment?
Sure.
Did we finalize the amounts on the previous item?
So I believe you all thought 250 to start with, and then what we will do is we're going to make that a range and bring back. to it.
Okay, thank you.
So on this one, are we okay with a $50 first offense?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so moving on to next. 981C, carrying tools or supplies in or on your garments. So this is most commonly hair clips, people clip to their apron.
Right on time.
We put low to medium because we thought, well, I guess if there's something dirty on you and you put your clip on it and you put it on someone's hair. You can see we don't find this a lot, and the fine is low. We don't have any evidence of any consumers ever being harmed from.
I think the only time it's going to get gnarly is the esthetician that pulls pointed tweezers out of their apron, or somebody removing any kind of tissue, living tissue, and tucking things into. Because I don't see it as a clip. Like I don't think it's difficult to get something. Although it just looks unprofessional, and the students want to stick something out, just take it off your shirt. But that's not the end of the world. But it's the pulling the tweezers out of the pocket.
Yeah, to be honest, I hadn't even thought of that
and the
because.
nippers and all the things. And if you're going to keep something illegal, you're going to keep it in your pocket.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I think that brushes too, that's gross.
Yeah, but there are a lot of now they're making like the belts for the brushes, and they're making them with a flap over them, and then you can actually label them clean. So after you disinfect them, you can put them in there. A lot of the handheld equipment for estheticians that they want on their person, you can actually disinfect those now, and they're labeled, and they have caps and all this stuff, so you can keep them covered. Because they've learned. I mean, this is the one that everybody kind of knows about now, but I don't know. Just the tweezers. Doesn't mean we have to raise it, or I don't know even how you catch it. You know what I mean? You wouldn't know. And if you're laying there with your eyes closed, you don't know the esthetician took it out of her pocket anyway.
Well, we're also not seeing that because they're usually in a room.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think we've ever seen that.
No.
Now I'm going to be watching. Yes.
Does this cover in the scope non-contact holster tools like a hair dryer that doesn't actually touch the client but is often carrying a holster?
A hairdryer would be,
You don't have to
I don't know.
That would be an electrical tool.
Okay.
touch the client.
Separate
Yeah.
category then.
It would be considered counted differently.
Okay.
So So no change. All right. Moving on to section 982, incorrect sterilization of electrology tools. Our electrologist couldn't make it today, but I would imagine you could all agree that this is a high risk to consumers. Electrology is an invasive procedure. You can see how we do not find this often at all.
I think that's great that we don't find it at all often, but I do think it should be moved up.
Right, I would agree.
I agree with that as well. At least 250.
Let's start at 250.
I kind of think in general, once we get to that high, that first offense should be around the 250 range. I mean, there's, what else would you do if something's already in high? You would never, I don't think you would go any lower than that, but luckily you're not seeing it very often, so.
Right,
Well, we don't have a lot. How many electrologists do we actually got?
about 1,500.
Yeah, it's pretty, and they're also in a closed room, so it's probably not
Right.
getting them. I mean, inspectors aren't responding yet. But you're not getting a lot of complaints in this one
Right.
anyway, yeah.
Had a few. There've been some doozies, but. All right. 983, personal cleanliness. This is when an inspector observes a licensee's attire not being clean or observes a licensee not washing their hands. So the attire, I'm certainly a little bit loose on because somebody's opinion of that differs so much. But not washing your hands is like probably one of the worst things we could do, right?
Yeah, this
Especially
needs
after
to
the
be
last
moved
2
up.
years.
The thing is, if the inspector's standing there and you don't wash your hands,
Right.
you're just like
And it,
dirty bird. Yeah.
yes.
And if it's a concern about just the attire, they can always appeal. I just really think that this needs to be moved up as well.
And I would be willing to venture that the complaint, the numbers of times that we've cited this have probably been because the inspector observed them not washing their hands. I don't recall ever seeing someone's attire being cited. But the not washing of their hands happens more than we would like in front of our inspectors.
Which is crazy, because when you're doing hair, you're always washing your hands.
Right.
And this was prior to COVID, correct?
Yes,
We live in COVID days.
yes. So that's a $50.
move it up to what, 150?
I'm still at 250.
On everything?
I just think as a matter of principle, if something is high risk, it should start at a high
Yeah.
price point. You should buy it the first time you get it.
Yeah, 250.
All right.
If I can add to that, I think it's important as a committee we think about that, what was just mentioned, because I would believe that once all these fine structures move into a certain category or certain place, I would imagine that DCA is going to be sending out some type of messaging, communication, and it would be good to kind of send that message to the industry that these are considered high risk and these are the fine structures, rather than have them kind of differentiate. I think it's easier for the industry to better understand how the fine structure was put in place, and then also help DCA communicate that more effectively. So,
Especially,
Also would drive, education to some extent around these specific issues. I mean, if DCA has identified these as so high risk, you're going to start at this high price point, I think it puts owners on notice, like we have to fix this problem if it's occurring in our place of business, and educators to really, stress this in education that not only is it a bad practice, not only could you hurt someone, but it's going to cost you, significantly.
and especially in a post-COVID world, I think everyone would be expecting the department to send out strong guidelines.
Yep.
And so I really think that we should continue to be consistent on that. Yeah.
All right. Moving to violation 984A. This is allowing a licensee with Infectious or Communicable disease to work on a person. So this is, an inspector observes a licensee providing service, and the licensee has an infection or a parasitic infestation capable of being transmitted. You can see this is not common that we see this, but it does happen. It is high risk. Obviously, that would be very high risk. So I'm thinking 250.
It's also not common because if I'm an inspector, I don't know how comfortable I am diagnosing somebody. You know, if somebody's coughing a lot, they could have just quit smoking and they're just coughing up all the junk that's in their lungs. They also could have COVID, right? And how does an inspector, I'm guessing when those cases come, there's a lot of gray area.
Yes.
Because you're not going to go search through somebody's hair to see if they have lice. So how are you going to actually see that parasitic infection at the distance an inspector would stand, that kind of thing. So while I love that we don't want people to do this and we've made it a rule, this is one of those things I think is, it's good to have it here, but I don't know that it can ever really, you know. So we can make that whatever price we want, because I'm guessing it won't get cited very frequently.
Yeah, it does not.
It does give them the space, though, if they were to see something on their hand, or, you know, someone's giving a facial and they've got, I don't know, there's all kinds of things, right? Just knowing that it's possible, I think if they saw something, they would take care of it.
All right, so up to 250 on that one. All right. Next is 984B. Now this is kind of the same thing, but opposite. This is allowing or requiring a licensee to work on a person. So this is when if the consumer has an infectious and communicable diseases. Now most licensees wouldn't do this, but we have heard stories of owners forcing or asking licensees to work on somebody that they probably shouldn't be working on.
I love that part of this rule, requiring a licensee, because I think that's the most common place someone's going to get cited here. Obviously, no one's been cited since 2016 on it, but I think you really have to hold owners accountable for not requiring it of the people who work for them. And those people have to be able to say no, and without any blowback from their.
I think we heard it a lot during COVID of people saying their owners are telling them they have to work on these, you know, somebody who's COVID positive.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So 250 on that one as well?
Yeah, I think we should.
All right. And the big ones keep coming.
Yes, is it Brandon?
Yes.
Yeah, I like how referencing to keep everything consistent with an increase, so 250
Okay.
makes sense.
Sabina, did you have something?
No.
Oh, okay. Next is 984E, performing services on inflamed, broken, or infected, or erupted, or scalp. Working without gloves when skin on hands is inflamed or broken, infected, or erupted. So this is if an inspector observes the licensee providing service to a consumer who has an inflamed or broken or infection on their skin or scalp, or the licensee has the skin issue and is not wearing gloves during the service. We've never found this. However, I would consider it a very high risk if that were to happen.
I agree.
All right, 250. Okay, next is 985, no use of a neck strip or towel. This is when we actually see a person providing a service without a neck strip or a towel between the neck and the cape. We rated this low. We don't find it very often anymore. We used to a lot, but we don't. We don't believe there's any evidence that suggests that that little neck strip is going to protect the consumer.
And the other thing on that, I would say too, because if you're using a clean drape on every client, why would you still need to have a neck strip even though the drape is clean?
Right.
Right.
Any thoughts?
You know,
Just get rid of it, or?
I have some thoughts on this. So, I mean, I go to a barber and they, shave your neck, and they, sometimes they nick you, and oftentimes they don't replace the drape. So, I mean, we're talking about a potential bloodborne pathogen.
No, I do.
So, for example, if somebody was to get nicked on their neck and then they put the drape back on and then there's blood on it and they use it on the next customer, there is that potential hazard. So I think it certainly is a regulation that makes sense. And for that reason, I think it's necessary to ensure that it's enforced probably higher than $50. Just from a male consumer who does get that type of service, where they're often using straight razors now, in barbershop. So
This also pertains to like any towel too, right? Like for the chemical drape, and one of the reasons I think that this is low is it was really hammered in on the practical. There's no way a student did not know how to do this because it was just something you did for state board over and over and over. And so it'll be interesting to see now that we don't have a practical, if it's not, I mean, this is all we ever talked about. It's like, where's your next trip? Where's your towel? Like, it was such a big deal in school with the practical exam. So I don't know if they're going to have the same muscle memory. I mean, obviously schools are still teaching it, but that was a big, like, state board thing.
I think we need to figure out what we're saying here. Neck strip or towel, that's like two really different things. A neck strip was never really meant for infection control. It's that little tiny piece of tissue paper. It isn't really going to do anything. It was meant for comfort. So when you do get your hair and all those little pieces of hair going down around your neck, the thing that they use the blow dryer on or whatever they do with it wherever you go, that it was meant for comfort. And so I think if what we were teaching students is the neck strip somehow is a protective thing, we were doing them a disservice and the consumer a disservice, because that really isn't the goal. Maybe that is when you would use a towel that then every time gets replaced and gets washed, but it's certainly that little piece of paper isn't necessarily going to protect someone. I would also say in the case where you might get nicked and you might have a little bit of blood, the risk of that being transmitted by that fabric from person to person is super exceedingly low. What's not low is the risk of someone's ringworm getting on you. But that neck strip's not going to help you in that regard. So I'm not really worried about bloodborne pathogens with the neck strip or the towel. I think towels should be used when you're doing a chemical service to protect the person's skin, just for sensitivity purposes, that kind of thing. But I think we've mixed two things here that maybe don't belong to be mixed, but it is the rule. But I think the neck strip itself it was never intended for an infection control piece of paper. It's something the industry just kind of made up on its own.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit that it was kind of sold as that.
Yeah.
Right? That if you had ringworm and wore a neck nut, that you do, Brandon. But if that, and then the neck strip was on and then you changed it out and put it on another person, the next person has a better chance of not getting the ringworm because of the neck strip. But it has kind of been sold industry-wise, or at least within the textbook as client protection using a neck strip or towel. So whether it's accurate or not, that's kind of how it's been sold. But
yeah,
I don't think we need to come up with another 985.A. I think it's just leaving it on there leaving it as is probably fine.
So what I was wondering though, is there a way we can add to this verbiage to say, or new, clean, a drape in between? Because if it says, the inspector comes in and say, we're, like in my salon, we use a clean drape on everybody. But if an inspector came in and we didn't have the towel around, are we gonna get fined for it?
Right.
So, I mean, like, it needs to be a little more clarified, I think, for folks.
Or
Like in
clean
my
drape,
salon,
yeah.
we use it, that's why our drapes fall apart all the time, because we wash them so much.
Right.
I think that's a good point. Is this committee tasked with possibly adding suggested language to the existing rules and regulations? Or are we just here for fine structure?
This committee is, today might not be the right time.
Okay.
So, but the board is currently looking at the health and safety regulations. We're in the process of updating those, so it's timely that we could make a change to this regulation.
Because what was suggested by the chair it makes absolute sense.
Can we put that on our next agenda? Or how does that work?
Well, this committee approved the most recent version of the updated regs for health and safety. Those are in process of being internally worked on. But that's something we can bring back and modify, and it's not a problem at all. We're at the perfect stage to do that.
We just need to make it an agenda item.
Right.
For next. Sure.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll be seeing the regulation language plenty more times,
Yes.
so you'll probably be sick of it by that time.
Okay, so we will flag this one.
Okay.
All right. Next is 986 neck dusters. And actually, let me take a second to talk about our health and safety regulations that we are approving. So maybe at our next meeting, we can have those up. They won't be updated because it's going to take a long time to update them, but you can see the draft of the regulations, the health and safety regulations, as well as this, once we've decided on this, because I believe in the health and safety regulations, we have eliminated neck dusters altogether. Because
We
they're,
eliminated them?
yes, because that's a common, national move that states are removing. Leslie, do you know how many
There's
states?
only 4 states, and you're one of them that allows neck dusters. Everybody else hasn't gone. They went the way of Credo blades. Like there's 4 states that allow Credo blades still, and so they went the way of Credo blades, mostly because they cannot be properly disinfected and still work. That sway you're trying to get with the neck duster. First off, you'd have to have one for every single client so that you could let them dry properly and all that, and they would be ruined. Also, they're made with natural hair, so they're porous, so they really can't be disinfected. And they just throw everything all around up in the air that is, things that we might be trying to keep more contained, so to speak. So most states have gotten rid of neck dusters.
Have we considered that in California?
I
That
think it is a change we made.
Yeah, that is currently in the proposal right now to remove neck dusters
Okay.
from California.
Well then, with all that information, I think this needs to be moved up too, especially with the amount of times the violation cited.
Well, that's true, yeah, because if we eliminate them and still fine them, there would still need to be a citation for it.
So start at 250.
Yeah.
250 seems awfully high for that, for something that's been in the industry for a very long time to me. And there's stuff like C3 that people are spraying, and I know not everybody loves that, but I don't know, seems high for an industry. Because even the states that are allowing it, I think they're also doing it.
I think this also includes regular brushes, if I'm not mistaken. Because
that's
of
what I'm
the example you put, the second sentence is, this is most commonly found in neck dusters, which makes me think we're saying neck dusters and brushes.
Agreed.
So I think it's confusing if that's what we're saying here. Because if you read down under the risk level explanation, it says, the last sentence, while brushes can also be a significant risk, staff are developing a new clear regulation for brushes. So I think this one is probably dependent on how those rules turn out. Because
Right.
your rules around brushes were really confusing.
You're
And
right.
so the brush rule is getting redone.
Right, I would agree, we might want to hold this one off as well and look at the way the new regs are going to end up being.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right, moving on to 987. 987 is when an inspector observed towels not being stored properly. Often clean towels are often left uncovered or in an open cabinet. So this is talking about clean towels.
It seems to happen a lot.
It happens a lot. will often find towels that are in a cabinet that's been left open. That's a violation. I don't personally think that should be a violation. We haven't found any harm caused from a clean towel. Now, the dirty towels is separate, or how when we find dirty towels. But this is talking specifically to clean towels. So it is usually towels that are rolled to look cute in the bathroom, or a towel that just came from the laundromat. They come in like roped,
Yep.
and they hadn't had a chance to put them away, and the inspector happens to walk in. That's a violation. Or it's an open cabinet.
Is there a way that maybe we could, speak to the inspectors on, like, you know, what that looks like? Obviously, if the cabinet's open, should they be that
Yeah, it
strong in it,
honestly,
or should we pull
usually,
back and it's just when it's obviously
yeah,
looking
it
dirty?
usually gets caught, if not by the inspector, you know, some inspectors may write down absolutely everything they see. Some inspectors might say, close the cabinet. But our site and fine unit definitely review that. If it's the, you know, your first offense that and they look at the violation, like, you know, maybe a stylist walked away fast and shut the cabinet and it didn't go all the way. I mean, we've had them like where they're open this big.
It happens.
Yeah, so we will usually not cite those. We'll usually educate someone without a fine, and tell them, make sure your cabinets are closed. But it is most commonly a
And
cabinet.
also, when I was on the DRC, and it's happened in my own school, where somebody does laundry, they take it out of the dryer, they
Yes.
put it upside down on the facial bed, they go back and they forget that they just dumped it, and then you walk in there like, oh, here's a bunch of clean towels that somebody needs to
Totally.
fold and put away. So it's kind of a common,
Also,
I think the risk is low as well.
I would say we should all really think these things through. Like, since we're here, we might as well think it through. What is it we think is flying through the air that's going to get on those clean towels and hurt somebody? Like, what bacteria, virus, or fungi is flying through the air, going to get on that clean towel and somehow hurt somebody? I mean, think about real world experiences. We all walk into stores and try on clothing that other people have actually put on their
Right,
bodies.
right.
And we
Until-
go in the
I will
dressing
say,
room and we put it on.
Until it's bed bug, and the last time I worked the clinic, we had a client leave, and there was a stack of laundry, and the person just left, and they took their robe off, and the student came out with the robe, and there's a bug bed sitting on it. We're like, ah, you know.
Oh, man.
So if you know, those that if we had stored the bed bug in the, I mean, I don't know.
But what we're saying though is that robe that person had on was now dirty. So now we're saying we combine dirty and clean.
No, but what I'm saying is if the clean isn't stored properly, and it gets, if the student had laid that on there,
Right.
or, and I know there was a outbreak of bed bugs at a massage school in New York because the students were allowed to bring in their own sheets and towels as a way to save money, and some were laundering and some weren't. So that's the only time it's
Oh,
going to
I
be a
totally
problem,
agree.
right?
Linens have to be clean,
Yeah.
they have to be laundered, and they have to be stored properly. And just not sure that
It's low.
a door being closed or something like
Totally,
that,
yeah,
you know, is the same thing.
Totally.
So
I think this is more of an educational
I agree with that.
So would you all agree on leaving it as is?
Yes,
Okay.
I would.
Okay. All right, next is 988, liquids, creams, powders, and cosmetics. So this is when an inspector finds dirty, open, and or not labeled product containers. Wax pots are our most common that we find that are very dirty, and believe me, we've seen some bad ones. And so this particular section also covers double dipping. So the actual regulation has a few different items within it. It has that they need to be kept in clean containers, clean and closed containers. It also has that they have to be directly labeled with what is in what the contents are. Rather that can be the manufacturer label, but if it's not, you have to label it. Very common that in nail salons they put acetone in a separate container and they label them acetone, which is great. But part of 988 is when only a portion of the cosmetic preparation is used on a client, it shall be removed from the bottle or container in such a way as to not contaminate the remaining portion, double dipping. So this is where you're supposed to remove only a portion of the product. So obviously, when you're not doing that, it could be bad.
I'm advocating on the double dipping alone of waxing that this be $250 to start with. Wax pots do not kill HPV. They do not kill herpes. HPV is the only known cause of cervical cancer in women in the United States, well, in the world. And on the outside chance that something like that could be transmitted, this is one of the leading things I use when we talk about staying a licensed profession. And people want to say, oh, what's the worst thing that can happen? A bad haircut. Well, you could pass HPV from 1 client to 10 clients in a scenario where there's double dipping. I realize this is very difficult for the inspectors to cite, but if an inspector walks into a room where waxing has occurred and there's 4 sticks in the trash can at 1 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 100 sticks, you likely know you have a huge problem. This also would stop people from doing things like sticking fingers in products, that type of thing. I think this one is a significant risk, and as such, should be $250 to start. I'm laying it on the line there on that one.
I would have to agree.
The only challenge is you're gonna have barbers and hairdressers that use a pomade cup, like a top, right? And they're gonna take this thing, and I'm just telling you, that seems $250 for that seems high. Then I know you have to make it consistent, but somebody that dips.
Yeah, but they shouldn't be sticking their fingers in that either.
Okay.
Because if they stick their
No,
fingers
you're
in it,
absolutely right. I'm just saying.
someone has ringworm and they go back and get more.
On the hair though,
And it's easy to figure out who's doing it. If I was inspector, the first thing I would do is go in and open all those pucks, and if I see finger marks through them, I know that this rule is being broken. And I think people make the assumption, and it's unfortunate, but particularly people who have been licensed a very long period of time, may have gotten into the habit of sticking their fingers in, like pomade, for example, thinking, well, nothing's going to be able to live in this medium, but things do live in that medium. Actually, the things that still live there are the hardest things to kill. They figured out how to live in that environment. So I don't think 250 is too high.
I agree, and I would also say that if the business person feels it's excessive, they can always appeal.
I would like to suggest that the fact that this has been cited as many times as it's been
Yeah.
cited, the current fine structure is certainly not a deterrent.
That's a good point. It is, and I do think wax pots are probably the highest on that, but we find gross pomade all the time. too.
Yeah, and usually those establishments that have excessive amounts of product bottles that are filthy is not a clean shop. And also for labeling, like everything should be labeled.
It's, usually when we're finding this, we're finding a lot more as well, so.
I've been fined in my salons because we're a beta and we do massages, neck massages before our haircuts. And I was just looking at our massage oil bottle that we put our aroma in, doesn't say oil on it, or it has and it's worn off from using oil. So, but it was an aha moment for me because the consumer doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
What that is, so, yeah.
All right.
On the redipping, as I recall, there's an exemption in there for products that basically destroy microbes, like nail lacquer and nail gel, based on experiments we did some time ago. It didn't come up, but I'm bringing it up only to recommend that that exemption be retained.
Yes. Agree completely. And just so we are all on the same page, what Paul's referring to is the current regulations do state that this provision does not apply to cosmetic preparations that have been demonstrated to be unlikely to transmit pathogens. Nail polish, artificial nail monomer liquids is the example. Pretty much know they're double dipping nail polish.
Okay, moving on to 989, prohibited hazardous substances.
Why are these all offenses the same amount?
For whatever the committee who previously made this didn't make it grow up, higher. I'm not sure why. It would have been,
I think it needs to increase.
yeah, I'm not
Per
sure
offense.
why at that time it didn't.
I think it needs to increase per offense. If they do it once, it's already a very high offense, but if they do it twice, that's really problematic.
Wasn't there something, because I was on wasn't there something about we had a limit? Wasn't there a limit or
There's a
something?
$5,000 limit for an overall
I remember that having to
citation.
do with it was so long ago that now I can't remember.
Yeah.
But there was something to do with why they did that was they in order to start it that high, they had to make it, I can't remember. It's
Yeah.
probably recorded somewhere, but there was some regulation around how much you could max it out to or something, which is why in order to start it that high, they had to level it out, or I don't remember. I know this isn't helpful, but I remember hearing what you said. I was like, wait, I've heard this before, like something, it was something to do with the site, like the committee that she's talking about that recommended it, and I don't know what the legality was around that.
Can we have that looked into?
Yep.
Thank you.
So we're still good though at minimum of 500. I would recommend that may be maintained. All right, moving on to 990, headrests, shampoo bowls, and treatment tables. An inspector finds a dirty shampoo bowl, which is the most common for this, or a treatment table, tables that are left in not clean conditions, and that we did list that as a low risk, because we haven't had any consumer harm that we've directly related to it, and that's why the first offense is at $50 at this time.
My concern with this is that coming from the consumer, coming into the place, that they feel safe, and seeing a dirty shampoo area or treatment table doesn't give them that safe feeling. So I don't know if it needs to go up to 250, but I do think that this is, obviously it's been cited a number of times. I think that we want to give consumers a feeling that they can go into a place and feel secure.
Mm-hmm.
As a disease, what would you think?
I can't remember, Christy, did the rules require treatment tables to be covered, like, before each service, like, with paper or a new sheet?
Or disinfected.
Yeah.
So like white
I have it.
disinfectant, either one.
I have it.
So you could clean and disinfect the actual surface itself and then put somebody
With like
right
a
on
fanny
it?
wipe or something.
So the actual regulation reads, the headrest of chairs shall be covered with a clean towel or paper sheet for each client. So that's one part. I don't know that anybody does that.
So is this in 990?
But I thought when they updated the practical, remember when we didn't have to use the towels for the SMA, you could do one or the other. You could use a fresh towel, either linen or paper, and you could spray it with the spray it with the disinfectant, and that was considered a sanitary maintenance area. I thought that was the same for not just the station, but also the treatment table. So they could either put a paper or linen down with HDS, or they could just use like the
So for the treatment tables, it says treatment tables must be covered with either clean treatment table paper, a clean towel, or a clean sheet after each use.
So it just changed for the SMA, but not with the clients on.
Well, you'll have to change it after every time they use
You know
it.
what I'm saying? If they're on a shampoo chair, or some places have those shampoo beds where you're actually laying down, right? You don't have to put a sheet or a towel on that table. You just have to spray it and wipe it down. You either spray it with the disinfectant that sits for 10 minutes, or you have to go through and wipe it down with standing wipe. But I thought it was the same as a
No.
SMA. Because nobody's putting.
And I don't believe it's
recommended a change in the health and safety regs, but we can look at it.
Yeah, because one
I
of the
think
other.
part of the reason we didn't recommend it, maybe we talked about it because it's ringing a bell in my ear, that the reason coverings actually may have stayed in as the only way to do it is that all of the materials that are used for a treatment table or a headrest, if you were to use a disinfectant spray properly for the full 10 minutes on them after every client, you would make what was semi-non-porous completely porous. It would destroy the material over a very short period of time. So you would take a relatively safe material and now make it an unsafe material. So I think that's why the coverings stayed in. I guess my question was, does this citation include, I never change my sheet on my treatment table that I'm doing waxing on the entire day? Or does it include?
Nobody's waxing on sheets, really. I mean, they're doing it on paper.
Or maybe I don't change the paper. Like, is that what this also includes? You know, it says it's most commonly the shampoo bowl or treatment table. Not as upset about the shampoo bowl.
Because we have these huge wax sheets that you can launder, or you can also completely sani wipe them, and they don't break down. That's the whole point of it.
They're made for that.
They're made for that, and then it's also more environment friendly because you're not going through all this paper and linens and stuff like that. But we just use the barbicide wipes, then you have to give it the 10 minutes or whatever for it to go through. But that's considered disinfecting a treatment table. You wouldn't launder that between each person because the point is you're not supposed to have. I mean, we just have to make the regulation is you're either changing the linen and cleaning it, throwing away the paper, or you're disinfecting the space.
So here's what was proposed in the new health and safety regulations. Treatment table paper shall be immediately disposed of after single use. Disinfect the treatment table before covering with clean treatment table paper, a clean linen, or a non-porous covering. Used linen shall be handled according to the requirements of 987.
So that would cover your item that you're talking about.
But also, like, if have my shirt on and I'm just getting my legs waxed, let's say, or I'm sitting in a sleeveless shirt and I'm getting my hair cut, what's the difference between the styling chair and then the facial bed if I have my clothes on, right? I could be getting a facial and the only thing is off is maybe my décolleté in my face, so it doesn't seem consistent that we should just disinfect this. You know, you should still wipe a chair down between each guest, especially now post-COVID. Everybody's wiping, everyone's like,
Well,
hopefully.
here's my concern with the language we're talking about. I mean, it says an inspector finds a dirty shampoo bowl or treatment table. It's not making these clarifications. It just says dirty. So I'm concerned that we may be talking about two different things when we're trying to find something related to the word dirty. And perhaps that shouldn't be the word that we're using there, but it concerns me that the word dirty is there.
Well, because it's obviously not been disinfected, I think.
Well, I'm assuming by the time visually it looks dirty,
It's pretty
it's
bad.
been bad for a long time. Like, if you can visually look at it and you go, oh gosh, that's dirty.
Yeah, it's bad.
That's my point.
Yeah, it's
That's
had problems for a very long time. That's why I'm saying is it, I walk in and the same piece of paper's been there all day and everyone's been getting their bottom half waxed on it? Is it the same piece of paper? Or is it they just changed the paper but didn't, disinfect the table or whatever? That's two different things.
Well, I can tell you what we usually find is a treatment table with a sheet on it that's very visibly dirty. Or a shampoo bowl that has
Hair.
hair in the drain.
That's what I'm getting at. And we're talking about two different things here. One is extreme cleanliness, and the other is this says dirty. And we're talking about that kind of situation. Clearly, I think that kind of situation, a dirty situation, would involve a higher fine. But as far as this extreme cleanliness thing we're getting into, I'm not sure.
Well, I think the other piece is the people sitting at this table, certainly Dee Dee runs it like a well-oiled, tight machine, like when she's talking about what she does. These citations aren't about you.
I promise
These
you there's hair
citations-
in my shampoo bowl right now. I guarantee you.
So these citations are more, I think, around,
didn't pick up her towel.
these citations, I think, are more around the ability of an inspector to actually put some teeth in. I find a sheet that may have been on here for a month.
Right.
and people keep laying on it. I think we want to we gotta remember, this is what empowers the inspectors to do something about something really bad. And likely if they walked in and everything in Dee school looks perfect except there's hair in the sink, they're probably not gonna cite you for it, right? They need to have some power to really
I agree, because so many of the things, they have to catch them in the moment. So you can't attach it to anyone, but this is something that it's like, okay, it's dirty, and it's just an easy one to like put a red flag on it and hopefully get them to change.
Because most of the time when you get these, they're pretty gross, right? Like, it's no question, like, oh, I just didn't do it this one time. It's not questionable. It is a repeat offense.
Is this the language we give inspectors?
The inspectors have the regulations.
Okay.
I mean, if
So
I can
it's not
add,
necessarily this language under examples.
But the textbook uses a lot of dirty and soiled. They're kind of trained that way in the beginning of this, like dirty linen, soiled, and I hate to label something dirty. It's like so gross to have a laundry bin labeled dirty because it's obvious, that's just what we have to do. But they're kind of trained on that from the very beginning, is that they use the terminology dirty and soiled is pretty consistent. Even though I know what you're saying, but I think from the license perspective, they're kind of used to that language. So I don't know if it was written for them to follow it or.
Yeah, I mean, this is just staff's statement, but the inspectors, they're looking for things that are dirty.
if I could just add to this discussion, we've been through COVID for the last 2 years. So if you look at the data there that's been provided to us, I mean, it's significantly dropped in 2020 and 2021, but if you look at the years prior to that, from 16 through 19, this was cited a tremendous amount compared to other regulations. So in my personal opinion, the current fine structure, and I'll go back to what I've said previously, is not a deterrent. I mean, the whole point behind fines is not to collect money for the state of California, it's to deter bad actors.
Agreed.
So, I mean, if we're seeing that type of data,
But it's pretty low. On the
over
risk.
1,000 on average each year
I'm
is
saying
low.
low in terms of risk. So we so far have kept things if they were low at that $50 or $100 spot. We haven't really.
I think the discussion was if it's high risk, we thought 250 was the minimum
Yeah, but
threshold,
this is
right?
considered low risk, so.
But I don't know if we've established a low risk threshold. I was just suggesting that maybe we should look at it as the fine structure should amount to deterrent. I mean, if we're seeing dirty lawn, these, I mean, that's disgusting. I mean, something that's gone a month without being changed out, and we're seeing that's significant.
I made that up. I don't know if that's
Even,
true.
even if it's a hypothetical, I mean, just to even think about it, it's just, I mean, so anyways, I just wanted to add that this is something that's cited a lot, so.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to differentiate this from the discussion we had earlier about clean towels. I think that's more of an educational thing. This is, the consumer comes in and sees something like this, that's a problem. I don't know if it's just a matter of more education, like the clean towel thing. I think this is more of I think perhaps, as you implied, we should increase a low risk level to maybe 100 rather than 50.
It's so common to have hair in a shampoo bowl. I'm just telling you, like every single salon right now, that's a really tough one. So just to start dinging people $100 because they've got hair, I don't know. If you're working in a real hustling salon, that's a very.
I think that the
No one's gonna
shampoo
get
bowl
hurt
is the
by that.
outlier.
No one's gonna get hurt by
Yeah, I think
that.
the shampoo bowl is the outlier, because I agree with you. The shampoo bowl has a lot less, it's offensive to me in terms of transmission than the headrests and the treatment tables, because those are places, look, if you have ringworm and in a barber shop and men keep putting their head back up against that headrest, and I mean, that is a way you could transmit both lice and ringworm, things like that. Treatment tables, again, that, to me, people are, getting waxing services, that kind of thing. The shampoo bowl, I'm not as concerned about it. Is there any way to separate those three things out, or do they all belong together always?
We can look at separating them out for separate violations.
Great.
I think if we could do that, that would make more sense, because I would agree that, increasing the fine structure for hair in shampoo bowl should be treated much differently than treatment tables being unsanitary.
And actually, if we just made one little change, to me, what's more offensive than the shampoo bowl itself is the neck rest on the shampoo bowl. It's back to the same thing as the headrest, right? It's
Yes, an
where
inspector can't
somebody's
see it.
bare skin should not be touching it, right? They should have a towel on when they're getting their hair washed, but I think.
Or they should be able to disinfect between clients. They should have the option of using a
Yeah,
towel, especially in a water
agreed.
crisis with linens and all that.
But I think shampoo bowls are different than these other two things. I agree.
Okay. We will work on that and bring that back. All right, next is 991, performing an invasive procedure. This is when an inspector finds a licensee using a product or a device that is invasive. Microneedling is very common right now. Surgical blades are, microneedling and surgical blades are some of our most common tools that we find. It's not common that we see this happening. It's more common that we find things. Because again, usually something of this nature is done with in a room that we're not looking at, when a person's receiving services. It would definitely be high risk, and we don't find it a lot, but we find it enough. And again, that was one of those ones that was 500 across the board that I think in our new range we can look at.
Thank you. So if an esthetician is licensed as an esthetician, and they're also able, they take a training class, and let's say they're also a tattoo artist, or they're, doing permanent makeup, is it the same thing now where they need to have separate spaces? Right, and there's, okay.
Yes,
And this is also where they'd be cited for a Lancet, if you found those?
yes.
The only caveat is, if they're working under a doctor in a medical spa, they're not gonna fall under this, anyway.
Our licensees would.
So if I was an esthetician working in a medical spa, I'm gonna call myself a medical assistant, not an esthetician. If I'm using a Lancet with a doctor in a medical spa.
Well, working in a doctor's office shouldn't change that.
Right, right.
Well,
It's a very.
yeah, so then my title would be medical assistant.
But you'd have to be licensed as a medical assistant,
No, there's no license here for that.
Right.
not in California.
Doesn't have that, so technically, that's when the medical board would get involved.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of estheticians that are working in med spas under doctors as medical assistants so that they can function in that space of using all of these more invasive procedures, but you're not gonna walk in there anyway, right? Even if I'm a licensed esthetician over here, I'm waxing at European Wax Center, but 3 days a week I'm at Dr. So-and-so's med spa, where I am an esthetician and with the state, but I'm doing these other activities, I'm not gonna get cited under this.
No, but if they're doing those other activities in conjunction with their aesthetic scope of practice, yes, they could get cited.
So the medical spa should not be a licensed establishment. So
Yes,
let's,
they should.
right, so there's something that's a little funky right there. 'Cause that's,
Oh, agreed.
yeah.
All right.
Because that's getting only more popular. So we might want to get proactive on how we want to set people up for success. And if you are that esthetician and they want to hire estheticians because they retail product and they have good client-consumer relations and they want them for pre and post-operative care and all that. So figuring out what that looks like for them.
Right. It's the
I don't have the
medical
answer.
associations and dermatological associations that we have to work with.
Yes. Well, as long as our board doesn't want to go inspect those people working, then the medical board people are,
Well, if we get a complaint about an esthetician that's working in a med spa, I mean, I would say most med spas are licensed establishments.
so, or like, let's say a doctor's office, like plastic surgeon's office, where they're more listed as not maybe a med spa, they're doing treatments, right? They're doing laser or they're doing more invasive peels, because that could also fall under an invasive procedure. It's just going into the dermal layer, right? Because an esthetician's not supposed to do that.
Right.
But an esthetician that's working under a doctor is doing that.
That would be practice of medicine.
Even if they're in a dermatologist's office, they're an esthetician. They don't call themselves an esthetician, they call themselves a medical assistant. Because there's so much of that, I don't know how
Well, I guess
that's.
if they don't have their aesthetics license
Posted,
posted,
yeah.
if they do a facial along with any of that service, then they're working within their scope.
Got it.
If they're not working within their scope and they're just doing these medical services, then that's under medical board and
Right.
we wouldn't touch it. But if they're working within their scope of an esthetician,
Because a lot of them are doing class twos, they're getting hired to do cool sculpting, like all of that stuff, and they're hiring them because they are a licensed esthetician, but then they're calling them medical
I've
assistants.
had some of my estheticians go to work for med spas.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know that it's definitely,
We just gotta get more
yeah.
yeah.
proactive on what that language is for them, I think. I don't have the answer, I'm just throwing it out there, yeah.
I agree. Okay, so the next one is 992, which is kind of along the same lines, and that's performing invasive skin exfoliation.
Oh, okay.
So that's when the inspector finds products that removes deeper than the epidermal layer of the skin. This is, it would obviously be a high risk to a consumer. It's a very hard one to cite for our inspectors because they're not seeing it done. We might receive consumer harm on that, and then we can investigate it through that avenue. But for our inspectors to just look at a product,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to determine.
Because what might be invasive for me would not be invasive on your skin, it's like so subjective.
I think this was cited in the past, maybe more common, anytime the inspectors, and Tika, you might remember this from when you were on the board, there was this 30% rule of, is it
Yeah.
glycolic acid? And inspectors at the time thought anything over 30% was an invasive procedure. But that's not necessarily true, and nowhere does it say in any of our regulations or statutes that you can only do things under 30%. So that's probably why that number was a little higher in 2016, but we educated our inspectors on that. So it is a hard one to cite. It would come with consumer harm. If we had a consumer harm complaint, we would look at this.
Again, on the issue of the increase, if it's so hard to cite, then seeing a second offense seems terrible. So I would look into what we're going to look into about the increases. Thank you.
Definitely. All right, section 993. Prohibited tools. An inspector finds a razor edge tool or to remove calluses. This is your Credo blades or your rasps, or a needle-like tool used for extractions. And so this is a needle tool that is purposely being used for extractions, not just any pointy tool that somebody might use. Back in the day, the board would cite for any type of pointy tool. We know there's tweezers out there that look like needles that are very pointy but can be, they're not used for extractions. We haven't seen them used for extractions. So we do look at and try to talk to people if we find a needle-like tool for what they're being used for. It is a needle, it is a Credo blades, the razors should not be being used on the feet, so of course it's very high risk. And
So 991, they have to catch them doing it, where 993 is they just find the item.
I believe so.
So the 993 would be cited to the establishment if the tools are found there, whereas the 991 is specific to licensees.
Got it.
So they're very similar, it's just who we can cite based on the verbiage.
And then the offenses look, because if I was a spa that had it and you found 3 of them, on my first offense, am I gonna get a $900?
No.
I'm just gonna get it once.
Yes.
So would it make sense for them to be more consistent with the 991?
I think so.
You mean the amount?
Yeah.
Yes.
500.
Yeah. I think everything needs to be cleaned up so it's consistent and more, yeah.
Establishments and the licensees know it's a $500 fine.
Totally.
And if I'm renting a space to someone and we have an agreement that they're not supposed to be having these tools in there, they do it anyway, I get cited with 993, and I appeal it, and I bring it to the DRC and say, hey, I had this agreement, this person was not supposed to have that in there, blah, 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 blah. What do they, I mean, is the DRC like, okay, looks like you tried your best and may waive that if it's a good faith effort to, yeah,
You know, the DRC has that option to do
yeah.
that.
Plus, when they appeal, I mean, you guys have settlement conferences, right?
Well, we have an informal appeal process, so they can appeal to what we call our DRC, which is 3 members of our board, and they can come in and they can appeal for 3 reasons. One, the fine's just too high, and ask the committee for help. They can appeal for the reason of, they don't believe it happened, like, you know, their reasonings, or just that they're supposed to correct it immediately, and the last one is they didn't have enough time to correct it. So, we have that, and then it can go to the, if it's upheld at DRC, and they still want to appeal it, then they would have to appeal it to the administrative law judge. And then
Okay.
that's when that sort of process would happen. Okay, good. All right, next is 994, Cleanliness and Repair. This is when an inspector finds excessive hair clippings. We specifically are saying hair clippings because that's what we find. We're not talking just, you know, you just had a client in and they're out and you forgot you haven't swept yet. We're talking excessive hair in the drawers, never been cleaned, lots of different colors of hair. Garbage presents or the broken, overflowing garbage cans, we see all of this. So we did consider that a medium risk, and the first offense is $50.
But again, going back to the consumer, it's not really about the cases that come out of it for medical concerns. It's about the consumer feeling safe. And if that's something they're seeing, I think that's a problem. So I would actually move it up like we've done the others.
The biggest risk here is a fall. I mean, that hair is on the floor is very, very slick, and a consumer could fall and injure themselves, as could licensees. So, I mean, it's gross having trash and broken furniture, but the risk of the hair clippings is, you know, somebody could really hurt themselves falling.
That's a good point.
I think this one, like what Christy was saying, was when you get this one, you're getting this Cleanliness and Repair. You're probably getting the Shampoo bowl. You're probably I mean, when it gets this bad, then you've probably got a mop in the bathroom. You're going to get dinged for using it as a storage container, and then you got the cabinet open. Like, these people are not going to walk off with a $50 or $100. I mean, it's, at least when I was
This
on
is
there.
part of a bigger
When I
picture,
was
yeah.
on there, it just is like, they're just, it's like, so, it's messy, and you might not feel comfortable, but feeling comfortable is subjective, and that doesn't mean you're gonna get sick, or gonna get something, right? Feeling bad is not good, and you might not come back as a customer, but doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna, you know, spread disease or cause harm. So, my experience on there was, those just got, once you got in this zone, they still walked in with a fat old fine, because if you imagine each one there, it's never just one. You never
Right.
just have a pile of hair.
You're gonna end up with
It's-
1,000 or 2 or 3.
there's so many.
Are we still capping it at 3?
It's capped at 5,000.
5,000?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the point for me is if it's a first offense, they get this chance, the inspector goes back, right? So hopefully, and then you're in the radar, and that's why we always tell people, dear, like, now you're in the system, so
Right.
the second and third to me seem the worst, because now we've tried to help you. You've got a little warning, you paid some money, which is uncomfortable, let's get it fixed. But yeah, now when you're doing the second and third time, now you're just like,
You don't care.
you don't care. Or you don't have people in place to help if something's happening, right? So we don't want to make it, I want everyone to know it's never just, no one walks in, gets this for $50 and they walk out. There's so much other stuff going on in there that it's
Well,
way
and
beyond
I agree,
just
and I
that.
think what we would hear at DRC then is a lot of people coming in, it would get really filled up, right? Of course, we care about the consumer harm and all that stuff, but I'm just thinking of our industry folks are gonna be like, are you kidding me? I owe $500 because I had some hair over here and
one other thing, and they're gonna come in and we're gonna,
Well, the pictures always tell you, you're like, this is
Right.
a mess.
right,
And you're gonna keep the 500, or it's like, okay, actually, those were pretty minor, like you
Right.
can tell from the photos.
I don't know, it's, yeah, all good decisions.
Yeah, I'm going to riff on this one. I asked for statistics earlier, and we don't have any, only anecdotes by the thousand. But in this case, we do have statistics. From my in lab safety type training, I know that slips, trips, and falls are the #1 cause of workplace injuries just across the board. And so for a consumer harm or potentially for the salon worker harm, if someone's slack on sweeping up that hair, that's in the slip, trip, and fall zone. So this is something that we should really focus on.
I agree with Jeff. I'm less concerned about cumulative penalties in one particular workplace because we've got a bad actor as opposed to the individual fine. There may be places where the inspector only finds garbage or excessive hair clippings. $50 is not a deterrent.
But being sued by a client that broke a leg in the salon, yeah, well, we don't want that happening, but that will be a deterrent. It's not the deterrent we want to rely on.
My thought is that we've been kind of talking about these different levels of risk, and I do think that we should be consistent in, if we determine it's a low risk, then we should keep the fine low, and then if we're saying that we believe this is a medium risk, it should reflect that. So that would be my only thought, is that if we determine that for low, $50 is a good starting point. If we're saying that we believe this is higher risk, and again, that's a different conversation about, are we appropriately, rating these risk levels? But if we agree that it is a medium risk, I do think it should probably go up a little bit, like maybe 100. Just keeping in mind these like broader scales that we're trying to establish so that people understand, these are categories that we're looking at hard, and you should know that if you get fined for this, it's going to be really heavy. So if we agree that it's medium, then maybe we should move it up a little bit. So like maybe $100 for a first offense. And what your point is well taken, Dee Dee, about this not being the only thing that someone who gets caught for this is, but maybe that's a good thing because we want to, if it's this level of dirtiness that, Reese mentioned being concerned about, then there will be a deterrent because there will be all the additional fines.
Actually, I think that's a great idea, and since we did half of this before this meeting, that maybe you guys can go back and if something was low, it starts at $50. I'm just throwing this out here. If it was medium, it's the one that starts at 100 or 150. And then all the high ones so far, we've been starting at 250. And then there's those outliers that are 500, right? But I think if we could go through and just, rather than trying to do it on each certain one, let's just determine the risk and then the money just falls into place.
Exactly.
The fine, rather.
Thank you.
I think that's an excellent suggestion.
So do we all agree that this violation is a medium risk?
Yes.
I do.
I
Yeah.
don't,
Low.
but I think I'm outnumbered, no.
Low.
Yeah, because I think what they're getting it for is low, but I
Low,
get
medium.
your perspective on the slip and fall, when that happens, it's bad, right? Chances are probably lower, but yeah, I think it's, from my perspective, I think it's low, but I also may be outnumbered, which is okay too.
I'm gonna go low with you too. I mean, but yeah.
I think your low may be because you mostly function in salons, women's hair and stuff, but I'm guessing a lot of these come out of barbershops where the hair is not, and,
We have barbers,
yeah.
they're full.
It's just, I feel like you guys are the choir and we're preaching to the choir, like, I feel like, you're clean people already, that's why you're sitting here. And I think some of the pictures I've seen,
Yeah, that's what
it's
they.
incredible, so.
Would I keep it at medium, maybe?
I'm good with medium, I'm, whatever.
Agree.
I agree.
It's gonna all come back to you again if you think about it when you go home for the next couple months. All right, the last one is plumbing standards. So this is actually a regulation that requires certain ventilation, running water, public toilets are available. We think it's medium, mostly because of the running water. We do have
Would that
Are-
need to be listed as like, should be, they have to have more, hot and cold, does that have to be in the?
I think it is in the rule. I think it does say hot and cold running
Because I
water.
thought it was,
That's a more detailed part of this.
A supply of hot and cold running water
Yeah,
is regular.
perfect.
How do the inspectors know what adequate ventilation is?
When you walk in and there's like a fog of hairspray, and you can't see, then it's
Well,
probably not good.
you know, the most times we've ever questioned that is if, and we don't find this hard, often at all anymore, is if you go into a nail salon and the smell is so strong, that's when we might look into it, but, you know, it's just not that common anymore. It was maybe back in the 80s when everyone was using the MMA in their nails, so you're mentors, right? Yeah.
They've changed the products so much in the last like 15 years, so the smell's not as bad. So that's why you're not seeing that. But if you walk into an establishment and it takes you back, then it's not being ventilated.
We know two things. We know there's probably a ventilation problem and they're using something that they probably shouldn't be.
Correct.
And we do find MMA a lot, but we don't find anything. So in other words, we're not checking the actual ventilation. We're looking for vents.
It's probably why it's not cited. I asked that because from OSHA, yeah, there are requirements for mechanical ventilation to provide air equivalent to the outdoor air. And, recently, because of COVID-19, we've got the new guidance from CDPH that requires increased HEPA filtration, portable filtration systems, things of that nature. So I don't know, that's why I asked, what's the ventilation? So it's primarily geared towards smells as opposed to what you can actually detect in the air through instrumentation, which is what, okay.
And there was something too with the formaldehyde, everyone doing the straightening systems. I remember back when that was really popular, that you'd walk in and it was like, it could make your eyes water if you weren't used to it. And so I think that was being, I just remember that being a discussion a while ago as well. Because they would put the product on and then heat it with a flat iron, and so you just have this like heated smell fog of formaldehyde. Oh, God, I know. Sorry.
I asked that question because I see it's been rated as medium, but when I see the risk, it's identified as hazardous fumes. To me, that sounds like there's a realistic possibility of serious physical harm to a patron, and we have it set at $50. So that's why I was a little
What we
concerned
find
about that.
is, I think my microphone died. What we find is MMA. I think is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah,
Methyl methacrylate.
correct.
monomer.
Methyl methacrylate, yeah.
And we cite for that as a prohibited
Substance, yeah.
Both MMA and EMA, the legal stuff, which is 1 carbon longer and a lot less problematic, although it still smells bad, they have what's called good warning properties, meaning they smell really bad even at a low concentration. Okay, an example of a substance with a bad warning property is cyanide. If you ever smell a strong smell of almonds and there's no one eating almonds near you, you're already in the danger zone. But it's the opposite with the acrylates. If they were at a level in the air that would cause you immediate harm, you couldn't stand to be in the room. You would be out of the room already. So in a sense, they're really good materials to work with for that reason, because they annoy you out of the danger zone long before they're going to do immediate harm.
And that's the problem with the newer nail stuff, right? It's the odorless, I've heard, is actually even worse because you can't smell it and you can.
No, the reason why it's odorless is it's a whole lot less volatile, actually. So it is, to the extent that you could call it safer, it should be actually safer. It's less volatile. That's why you don't smell it. The one substance I worry about is those burst removers, which are methylene chloride.
Mm-hmm.
Methylene chloride has killed people in closed spaces where they were cleaning car parts or whatever, and I doubt that a bottle this big sold for removing nail gels is going to have enough methylene chloride to kill somebody, but I'd be worried about the long-term effects of that. I'm speaking off the cuff. my advice and my industry friends' advice has been, just don't use this stuff, oh my gosh. But we haven't calculated how much it would take to kill a nail tech. I don't think we're anywhere near that, but it's a substance that shouldn't be used at all.
You're talking about the stuff that makes the gel bowl.
Yes. Yes. There is no safe legal substance that can have that effect. If you see that happening, it's methylene chloride, regardless of how it's labeled. Often they're dishonestly labeled.
The other thing that is, I've not heard of it in California, but in some other states they've struggled with because they allow the use of bleach, chlorine bleach, where chlorine bleach gets mixed with ammonia-based products, and creates very dangerous gases. And so again, the smell of it is pretty noxious, but people expect that when they're using chlorine bleach, and so people will stay in that environment thinking they're actually doing some cleaning. I suspect the problem with this rule and why it never gets cited around ventilation is that most of your salons are likely in strip malls and stuff where they don't control the ventilation. It's somebody else that determines what the ventilation is, up above them, and that's some drop ceiling kind of a thing. So I'm guessing this may be, they go in and it smells bad and they could cite it, but they can't actually even get to the ventilation. That's not under their control, their power.
I think I want to go back to the idea that rather than, in this case, rather than worrying about exact cases, more about the idea of we're setting a standard for our places, and this was pre-COVID. So we really should be showcasing standards for adequate ventilation as a state department generally. And so while I don't know that it would be cited and that they necessarily would know to determine it's not adequate, I think if they're cited for that, there's a reason they're cited for that. And in a post-COVID world, I think we really need to take ventilation into account.
So do we think this moves up to a higher level?
100.
You know what I mean?
The risk?
The risk.
Oh, the risk.
Do you think it's a medium risk, or do we think it moves up to a higher risk? Because keep in mind, it's not just ventilation, it's also
Water and toilet.
hot and cold water, and a toilet.
I would suggest raising it because not having hot water also limits somebody's ability to, properly wash and disinfect their hands,
Okay.
which is in
good.
other
And
rules
also if they're
before
doing
this.
laundry, they can't take it to the
They
right
can't
temperature
properly
either.
launder.
But it should have a toilet.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we rarely find that.
I know,
But
I mean, you could put it at high.
if
It's not-
we
it's not like
did,
everything.
it would be pretty bad. Okay.
I just find it interesting that ventilation is under plumbing standards. 995.
Actually, you know what, that's a mistake. It's called building standards.
Oh, building standards.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, definitely higher.
Then I would raise it.
Alrighty, that's it. Did any of our committee have any more comments before we open to public comment?
Good job.
Alright, any public comment?
Fred? Go ahead.
Alright.
So we adjourn. No. Sabina, what do we do?
Are we considering these as recommendations and for the staff to work on to bring back to the committee again?
We do that.
Okay, so we'll do that, and they'll bring it back to you again, and then, so that moves us to item number 5.
And so
We did.
just so everybody knows, what we'll look at is those fines and becoming consistent with the low, medium, and high, and the range. Brendan had given us that information after our last meeting, so we'll be looking at that. So hopefully when we come back to our next meeting, we will have that all put together for you to look at. Okay?
Now we go to public comment.
Public comment not on the agenda.
Not on the agenda, Fred.
always try to think in terms of the lowest common denominator, not the teeny establishment or your establishments. And you're talking thousands of dollars. I mean, some of the fines that you suggested today will add up to thousands of dollars. So your DRC docket will increase dramatically. So that's an unintended consequence to this. I will say that during the COVID years, the board inspectors really kind of changed their attitude and perspective, thanks to leadership of the staff of this board, to education and support rather than treating professionals as delinquents. And I think that had a good effect. And I'll just make one other general comment. It's not the job of the board to make a salon marketable or to improve their image. That's the market. It's your job, it's the job of the board to protect consumers. So keeping that in mind, I think, is important as a health and safety committee. But I really appreciate all of your time, thoughtfulness, and consideration today and past weeks. Thanks.
Thank you. So, since we're done with public comment, any suggestions for future agenda items with the?
Yeah, just on the note of, we just discussed, what is the role of this committee in relation to the inspectors directly?
Not much, in a sense.
We don't, our committee doesn't give the inspectors their guidelines.
No.
Okay, and what committee does that?
The laws and regulations do that.
Okay.
So they don't really work on discretion, in a sense. They go in and they should be documenting what they see based on the rules and regulations.
So then my question would be, should we have a future agenda item related to this committee's perspective on informing the other committee?
So this committee will always make referrals and recommendations to the full board. If you have additional ideas, like you're addressing the regulations, your fee structure, right? And obviously, I'm not sure this structure, but then we'll go to the Law and Regs Committee or just the full board after they do this schedule. Right. So there might be some instances when you look at some other regulations or laws and you recommend some changes that may go to the Law and Regulations Committee or just might go directly to the full board. But your executive officer has authority, and you've delegated that authority for her to oversee the staff and the functions and the day-to-day functions of the board.
But we do have an enforcement and inspections committee. So if there's, like if we want to talk about inspections policy, then we would take it to that committee.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to check if that was something perhaps we needed to discuss in a future agenda. I'm not hearing that it is, but that's why I brought it up.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just wanted to check in and see if, with adding in the dermaplaning that's in there now, I know that as we're updating these rules and regs, just thinking in the back of our head that estheticians and cosmos may be doing that. We don't have a ton of guidelines on it. I'm still trying to figure out in my school how to train on it and who's approved. I have an idea, but it's just thinking, making sure that
That's a great idea.
as we update this stuff, does it include that so we don't have to go back and fix it? And then same, this might not be the right, but what are we doing with this lash and brow tinting thing where now it's approved, but then people are now getting cited because it's not FDA approved or whatever?
We're, in the revised health and safety regulations, we are modifying that item, because I think the FDA is, conflicted at this point, and I think tinting should be allowed.
saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's allowed in almost every other state. And so we're modifying the regulations that would remove that FDA portion.
Okay.
Because I feel like that puts us in a position to enforce another state agency's
Right.
rules. And the FDA did just come out in October with a decision that stated a certain type of tint ingredient is acceptable. So they basically have contradicted their own import alert. And Allison has been attempting to get a hold of the FDA for 3 months straight now. And we just are being told, we'll get back to you. So I don't know if they made a mistake and they're contradicting themselves and we brought it to their attention, or if they don't want to talk to us, we don't know. But
Yeah.
we are trying to, one, modify our regs, one, trying to get the FDA to change their import alert when they just came out with there's a brand of tint, and it has something to do with the developer, and I can send you the information
Yeah.
if you'd like. It's a chemical name that I can't think of. Do you know?
Could-
Silver nitrate they're saying is safe to use as tint, the developer portion of tint.
Mhm.
So they said that just in October of last year, but yet they won't do anything about their import alert. And then our reg says you can't use anything that's disapproved by the FDA. So they've contradicted themselves. And I also think we shouldn't be enforcing FDA requirements.
Yeah, agreed on that, because that's, if we opened it up for them and everyone's like, we're tinting lashes and brows and all of that, and then now I guess some people, I don't know if you know, but now some places have actually been given a cite and fine. They've been given a citation for having the product in their space when they were under the impression they could do it. So that's kind of a bummer. And then should we also think about like the lash perming and like brow lamination, just as these services that people are doing, if there's any of these regs that would fall into like this disposal? Obviously, those are all things that have to be disposed of. The little pads, the spoolies, all that stuff has to be thrown away. I know there's some silicone pads out that you can disinfect, and those can go in the disinfectant, but just dropping that stuff in as examples so the inspectors know, I think, or if you want to, I could screenshot some common supplies for them.
Yeah, that would be great.
If they need some help with that.
That's good.
Is there what's the status on the 600-hour? Is that a health and safety concern for anyone?
For the hair?
Yeah,
I think aren't you guys still?
It's about a year and a half out still.
okay. That was it, thanks.
But we probably should think about that and looking at our regs again.
Just because I think it'll affect all the, yeah. We don't have to do it twice.
We will contact all of you for a date to set up our next date. And we will bring back this information, and we'll also get the proposed regulations and put that in the packet as well, so that we can cross-reference everything.
And it'll always be here.
Probably.
Got it, okay.
All right.
We adjourn.
Thank you.
Yeah.